How you doing, guys? It's your boy Nando and Jermaine, and you know what it is. It's the Pound for Pound boxing show. Today, we've got a very, very special guest, model, actor, presenter, anchorman, Antoine Allen. How you doing, mate?
I'm good, thanks. Thanks for having me on the show, guys.
Thanks for joining us. Thanks. It's a pleasure having you on. Antoine, I want to talk about your career. So you're a sports reporter and a journalist for ITV. I want to ask you, how did your passion and knowledge for sport begin?
So to begin with, I come from like an athletics background. So when I was young, I did 400-meter hurdles, got to rank #1 in Great Britain. Then I injured a bone in my foot like literally 2 weeks later. So my dream was always to go to 2012, and obviously I wasn't able to do that because I was injured. After that, I still remained in the gym, still tried to stay somewhat fit. But when you kind of competed at a national level, you kind of always dream of going back to a national level, or at least that fire and that hunger stays in your belly for you to be able to push your limits. So when I went to university, the only thing that I could kind of replicate that was becoming a sports model. So I was able to kind of do the stuff that I used to do, but on camera, make a bit of money, get to go interesting places, have a fun time. So that's the reason I kind of stayed in shape. And I've always been someone that's liked taking on challenges. So I already had a good base. So when you do 400 meters, you're already quite physically fit. So I'd be on YouTube and I'll be watching Floyd Mayweather skip. And I was like, okay, look, let me try and learn how to skip because I was terrible to begin with. So I kind of mastered that. Then I'd move on to calisthenics videos and I'd be like, wow, let me learn how to do the human flag and muscle ups. And to begin with, I was terrible, couldn't do it. Then eventually I mastered that. Then it was like, okay, my friend in Northampton, where I'm from, he owns a powerlifting gym. And I went back to Northampton because I live in London. So I went back to Northampton just to train. And he was like, oh, I'll come down to the gym. The same day they're having a competition where it's basically a push press competition where your maximum bench was then added to your maximum deadlift. Now, I come from an athletics background where I wasn't used to doing 1 rep maxes. Everything was for reps. So I knew I could bench because I just love bench. So for the push press, which is basically your normal bench press, but you've got like poles either side, and all you need to do is push it up. You don't have to bring it down and push it up. It's just kind of like how much you can push. They're like 145 kg, and I weighed like 80 kilograms at the time. And the next event was deadlift, and I'd only done deadlift for reps, so it was kind of a case where I was like, well, I don't even know I can deadlift. So I used to do like 100 kg, and they were like, well, if you can bench press 140, then you should be able to do more than that with your legs. So I was like, okay, cool, let me give it a try. Everybody's laughing at me. So eventually I got to like 170, and I kind of got like an addiction to deadlifting after that. And it's the reason that my back is ruined now. So I ended up slipping a disc like a year down the line, and I tried to do like 240. So it got to the point where basically I couldn't do anything other than talk about sports rather than compete in sports because a series of injuries kind of crippled me. But I always had that passion for sports itself. But I had a passion for lots of different other things. So in terms of how I began hosting events which were music related because that was the first gig that I could apply for. I didn't have a show reel. I didn't have any way of proving I could do what I said I could do other than I went for the interview and the person needed someone who was cheap and seemed confident, so they gave me a chance. But luckily enough, that sports background I've just explained to you enabled me to then get the chance to be one of the presenters during the Rugby World Cup. So I grew up in a school which kind of was rugby related, so Northampton School for Boys. Steve Thompson came from there. He went on to win the World Cup. Courtney Laws went there as well. So if you're rugby fans, they're 2 England stars, essentially. One of them is a World Cup winner. So it produced some decent rugby players. So it meant I had a good connection with rugby. My family used to watch New Zealand versus England all the time. We'd be cheering for Jonah Lomu. So at the Rugby World Cup, I got a chance to interview Martin Johnson, which was really great. Then I interviewed Sebastian Chabal, who's an absolute beast, and he broke my hand when I shook his hand. And then for me, I interviewed Jonah Lomu. So I'd never in my wildest dreams imagined I'd meet one of my heroes and be able to ask them questions for like 15 minutes, live audience. Saddest thing is not recorded. So it only exists in my mind and the one selfie I have with Jonah afterwards, which is kind of the only fanboy moment I had where I went up to him after the interview and I just said, look, you were my hero growing up. It was like I was a little kid going up to like my dad's mate and asking for a selfie, and he knew in my eyes who he was to me, and it just showed like the level of humbleness and the level of inspiration he had in himself. He didn't embarrass me. He just did the picture, signed the ball for my mum, shook my hand, went on his way, and 2 weeks later he died. So it was kind of those moments whereby I never get to replicate that interview, and a part of me is kind of happy that I don't get to rewatch it, because when you rewatch your interviews, you always think, I should have said this, or I should have done that, or I should have been more probing here, or I should have asked that question. Now it just exists in a perfect form in my mind, and I know I always have that moment whereby I met someone who was on my list of people I just wanted to meet. I didn't want to interview them, never dreamed of interviewing them, but I was given that a chance due to the experience I built in other areas, and someone saying, oh, well, you've got the sports background, maybe you'll be good at hosting this live event, which is the Rugby World Cup, massive platform. And from there, it kind of opened more doors. The nature of sports presenting specifically is kind of who you've met, who you've interviewed. That's how someone will interview you. They'll be like, okay, we're going to give you a chance to talk to such and such. Are you going to be starstruck? Are you going to stumble over your words? Are you going to make an interesting interview? So I think what separates me from other reporters specifically is that I came from a background of hosting live events, so that meant that everything I did was live. You only get one chance to do it, and people are in the audience, so you're used to trying to put on something that flows from question to question, that's watchable from minute 1 to minute 10 or minute 20 or minute 30. Whereas when you make news reports, you turn up on the day, you're trying to get specific answers, and then when you get back to the studio, you kind of make a report around that. So you have like what we call a SOT, which is sound on tape. It'd be like 20 seconds of Anthony Joshua, voiceover for me, another 20 seconds of me talking about the end of it, and then it ends. So it doesn't have to flow, but because I come from a background of live events, so I still try and make things flow. So the biggest interview I had was with AJ, and he got like over 800,000 views online, because it flows from like minute 1 to minute 19. It's a conversation. I'm still asking those probing questions, and it enabled the viewer to watch all of it through without thinking, oh, this guy, he's got a list of questions in his hand that he's referring to. He's breaking eye contact. AJ looks bored. Like, none of that happens. It just flows, and I think people enjoyed it because of that. And the way I was able to get to that point was based on my experience of Rugby World Cup, 2 Champions League finals, announced with the Asian Athletics Championship in India. Again, something I just never imagined I'd ever do or ever go. But again, right place, right time. So I was presenting football for a National League conference. It was Forest Green versus Tranmere Rovers. And the company that hired me, they were inside. Like the main director was inside. So I was like, I can either go home, because the fan zone was outside. I either go home or I go inside and say hello to the guy, maybe watch a bit of the game. I'm not a Forest Green fan. I'm not a Tranmere fan, but I had nothing else to do that day. So I go inside. I'm sat down next to the guy who's literally hosting the whole of the stadium, but it's National League, so there's not many fans there. They're passionate fans, but there's less than 10,000 basically. Anyway, so in between him doing his job, he was like, oh, where'd you come from? I was like, I'm from Northampton. He's like, what do you do? I said, oh, I used to do athletics. He goes, oh, I've got a potential job in India. Do you know athletics? Can you commentate? And I was like, okay, I've never done any commentating before in my life. I knew athletics, but I didn't know how to commentate a whole event. Anyway, I thought, okay, in the nature of presenting, people say stuff all the time, like jobs-wise. You never know what's real and what's not real. You never know what's a half-baked idea, what's a real idea. So I say yes. Don't hear from him for like a couple of weeks. I'm like, cool, whatever. At the same time, I get booked for the Champions League final in Wales. So I said yes to that because I'd already done Champions League final in Milan. So it's the same company. Got to interview Ryan Giggs, David James, and it's just a really cool event. Also, I'd never been to Wales before, so it's always a good... presenting is a good way to go places you've never been before, if you're lucky enough to go places that you get to go to. Anyway, so I say yes to that. Then this company comes back to me and they're like, oh, yeah, we want you to go to India. And I'm like, okay, cool. And it's literally a day between the events. So I'm like, Jesus Christ, I'm going to be like super tired. I need to do some research. So during my time at the Champions League, I'm literally researching more about Asian Athletics Championship, which is literally India, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, all these countries that ordinarily you don't know their athletes unless you're in that world. So you need to try and pronounce their names properly. you're the announcer for a whole stadium. Like, I'd never remotely done anything like that. So we get to India, and it's kind of how you'd imagine like the Olympics to be, but very low budget. So we get there, people put rosary beads around our necks. We get ferried to and fro to the stadium, and it was the like most random and fun experience. But the point I'm telling you that story is simply saying yes to opportunities opens doors for you to both learn what you can do and what you can't do, what you enjoy doing and what you don't enjoy doing, and just giving you a chance to see the world. So I think it's like a year after that, I was offered a job in Berlin, so I became a full-time football presenter for a company called One Football. I was doing daily news in the morning, so it'd be like, this is the gossip of the day, yesterday's results, this is what's coming up. These are like 3-minute videos. Then I'd make discussion videos, which is my passion, like sharing opinions and getting debates. That's what I like. I do a discussion video, and then after that we do like a live show. The problem is, anyone that's on YouTube who's a YouTuber knows, getting views is the name of the game on YouTube. Sometimes it doesn't matter how good your content is, if it's not marketed properly, if the channel's already dead, if they've had bad videos before, if they won't give you the time to build it up, then it's a long process. So in Germany, it was a case whereby I was used to being at events and talking to people. Whereas when we were in Germany, I was talking about the Premier League. We never went to a Premier League game. We never interviewed players. So it wasn't actually that interesting experience for me. It was equivalent of being someone who writes blogs, but you're just talking to the screen. So eventually I left. And then on top of that, I then got a job, a stint doing a documentary. And documentary is my true passion. So I was able to combine my documentary love since I joined ITV with my love also for sports. So I was able to use those skills that I just talked to you about in terms of interviewing skills, whereby I tell people stories and enable them to show how they've got to where they are. And I always think that's the best thing when it comes to sports. You can be a sports reporter who just gives results. Chelsea PSG tonight. Chelsea Real Madrid tonight. It can be Manchester City PSG. It can be Canelo Saunders. It can be Tyson Fury, Anthony Joshua. You can tell the result of what's happening, or you can be the person that tells the story up to that point, how those two men got into the ring, what motivates them, what challenges they've overcome. And I try to be that person who gives people a little bit more knowledge about the fighters or the sports people they follow, learn their story, learn what motivates them, learn how that sport itself has changed their life. And then also, I always try and ask the question of what's your advice you give to one of your fans, or what's your advice to give to someone going through your situation. So when someone watches one of my packages, they get both knowledge of the person they support or someone they never heard of before and they want to support going forward, but also something that benefits their life, rather than you're just a viewer who's been told to take in information that you're just going to forget about the following day. Hopefully, like example with my documentary I made about Lawrence Okolie recently, hopefully people watch that and they know more about Lawrence, but also they learn more about how he's overcome obesity, how he's trying to encourage people to believe in themselves. And through listening to his words, you can then be motivated yourself to achieve whatever you want to do in life. It doesn't have to be boxing. It can be simply waking up in the morning and doing some press-ups, or going for a walk, or reading a book, or talking to a family member, or trying something that you thought you couldn't do. I always think sport's full of inspirational stories, but they're not always told in the best way. So essentially, like I just said, I was in Germany, did a documentary, realised actually, let me come back to the UK, give the UK another chance so I can do more documentaries. At the same time, I was lucky enough to be a presenter for Arsenal, so I support Arsenal. So I was presenter for Arsenal for a season. I'd been a steward for Arsenal for 10 years before that. So it's like I've tried many different jobs. I've tried many different things. I don't think there's anyone like me in the media. Obviously, I've been talking for ages now, so I'll stop. But there's no one like me in the media in terms of I've been on radio. So I was on the Penny Smith show. I was like a co-host of that, like ad hoc. I've been in a Netflix BBC series where I played an assassin, which is super random. I've been an extra in movies, and now I'm a TV reporter / presenter. So I've been able to kind of say yes to a lot of opportunities, which has enabled me to kind of see the world from different perspectives, which I think helps me tell stories, but also just means that I can say I've lived an interesting life, and I've tried things that I've been good at, I've tried things that I've been bad at, and it enables me when I interview people from different walks of life. So I've interviewed Daniel Kaluuya, I've interviewed Sadiq Khan, I've interviewed Anthony Joshua, I've interviewed business owners, I've interviewed people who've had racism in the army, I've interviewed people who have gone through cancer. All of them have individual stories, but the basic techniques you get from interviewing is asking someone a question that you're interested in and that you think the audience is going to be interested in, and then enabling them to tell their story through their own words, through good questions that get to the heart of what they're trying to say. Sorry, I rambled for ages just then.
No, it's brilliant. It's a brilliant story. Because basically, me and Jermaine, we did stewarding as well for over 10 years at Chelsea Football Club. So it's inspirational to see that. What I wanted to ask you is, I think you kind of answered it for me already. If there was anyone watching right now and they want to do what you're doing right now, would your advice be to be open to many opportunities that you wouldn't normally think of doing, for example? So, for example, if someone's not into athletics, but there's that opportunity to do the Asian Athletics Championship, to go to India, to actually, maybe go for it and actually do your research, and it might open doors for a new, more better opportunity after that, like it did with you. So obviously you did that, went to do the Champions League and so on, and here you are now. Is that
yeah, I think it's a case of you've got to strike. Essentially, there's two questions you have to ask yourself. Am I capable of doing this job? And where would this job potentially take me? Now, in terms of am I capable, could I commentate what I can present? Would I freeze up if something happened? You don't know until you're there. But because I had live presenting experience from music and loads of stuff happens, band's not ready, the guitar's not working, band hasn't turned up, like loads of stuff happens in that world. So you get used to ad-libbing. So I was like, okay, cool, I've been in that situation before. So example, whilst I was at the Asian Athletics Championship, the 100 meters, as everyone knows, especially for men, should take less than 11 seconds. Like, that's a long 100 meters. During the 100 meters in the final, there was a rainstorm, so it took 11 minutes. There's 11 minutes, there's a video of it, there's 11 minutes of me doing commentary for something that should have taken 11 seconds. They do, I think, maybe 4 or 5 restarts. There's a faulty start. There's a false start. So a faulty start's whereby no one gets disqualified. It's just there's something wrong with the machinery. False start, obviously, someone went too soon. And then eventually the race starts. So because the rain's going on, we're in the commentary box. And this is kind of like, it wasn't the most well-organised championship. Like it was really cool there, really great fire display and fireworks, but in terms of getting messages to me to know what's going on, I'm just looking down at the track like everybody else, trying to work out what's going on. Like it was super crazy. But during that time, it's like trying to build the hype up, trying to get the fans quiet, because obviously before the 100 meters final it needs to be like shh. So I was doing that all the time. But then when the race starts, getting that hype back up, that was a great experience. But at the same point, if you don't have the confidence in yourself, at that moment, you might crumble. Like some of the people I was working with started to cry because it was a high-pressure situation and not everyone can handle it. So, yeah, if you think you can handle it, then you go for it. Then in terms of where it's going to go. So don't say yes to every single opportunity simply because you can get pigeonholed into a world that you don't want to be in. So if you have no interest in bowls, don't volunteer to commentate for bowls, because you become the bowls guy. And if you're not feeling bowls, then you probably don't want to be the bowls guy. But if you do have an interest, or you're not sure if you have an interest, give it a try. But understand that when you're giving it a try, there's probably someone who really wants that opportunity, you're taking the opportunity from. So make sure that you're going to use it for a reason. You're using it as a showpiece, something to go in your show reel, something to go on your CV, something to prove to yourself whether you really want to do it. Overall, make sure you're putting your 100% into it. In terms of getting to where I am, I have a super unconventional route to being a TV reporter. Like, because I was a presenter before I was a TV reporter. Most people you see on TV who are reporters are former producers or former researchers. That means they were behind the camera organizing jobs or arranging interviews, that kind of stuff. So whereas I was always front of camera. When I was a YouTuber and a blogger for my own channel, I was doing stuff like I had to film myself. Even now for ITV, I film myself, my own stuff every so often. But apart from that, I've never been a producer. I can produce in terms of make something for me, but like if someone said, Antoine, we're going to make a documentary tomorrow, we need you to produce for someone else, I would enjoy it. Like I'm very much, if I'm not asking the questions, then you need to get someone else to do the research for you. But other people enjoy researching, they enjoy being a part of the process to make stuff. Me, anytime I watch a documentary, I'm like, man, I wish I was presenting that documentary. Like that's how I think. Anytime I watch a really long interview, I'm like, man, I wish I was doing that interview. So it's like, if that drives you, then push yourself forward to be in that world. But understand, this is what I come to recently, you've got more chance of being a footballer than being a TV reporter. Because, like in terrestrial TV in the UK, there's BBC, there's ITV, there's Channel 4, there's Channel 5. Now, the BBC is a huge organisation, so there's quite a lot of different places you can be in the BBC. You could be BBC One, you could be BBC World, you could be BBC Radio. So there's more jobs there. But if you want to be a TV reporter, there's what? 6 o'clock local news, 7 o'clock national news, evening news, and then there's Good Morning Britain in the morning. There's the BBC Breakfast in the morning. So there's not really that many opportunities for you to be on TV if you want to be a TV reporter. And then in terms of age, I'm 33 years old. What's his name? Jon Snow recently retired. He's in his 70s. So he's been in it for a hot minute. If you look at his CV, he's been everywhere. He's like Berlin Wall. He's Nelson Mandela. He's met everyone there is to meet. So he's been doing it for a long time. Like if I was to retire today, sports-wise, I've met a lot of people. Politicians-wise, Sadiq Khan, that's it really, like some local politicians. I couldn't say like I was at such and such an event when it happened, but I've only been doing this 2 years in terms of TV reporting, so I'm not going nowhere. So anybody's thinking I'll replace Antoine Allen, I might be doing this for another 30 years. If in terms of Johnson, I'll be doing this for another 4 years. So my slot on that TV show is going to be there for 40 years. So for you to find your break, if you're a young person, you got to wait a hot minute to replace someone. Like obviously Jon Snow is retired now, so someone's going to replace him. But you're always trying to replace someone unless they move on to I don't know, Fox News or CNN, they go to America or they go to Al Jazeera. Like there's other places outside the mainstream. But if your goal was like me, I grew up watching Trevor McDonald. If you're trying to follow in Trevor's footsteps, bro, there's not many places on ITV for you, and I'm not going nowhere. So it's patience basically. And for me, when people inbox me now, which is weird because I used to be the guy sending messages to people like, oh yeah, I'm a presenter. Could you pass my email on to the HR people to let them know I exist? One, as a reporter, I don't even know the HR person's email. Like, so that tactic does not work. Like I used to do it all the time, used to waste my time. But I always say this, if people don't know you exist, they can't give you an opportunity. So the reason I got to go to Germany was because someone came on my profile and I used to message every single person that added me saying, hi, I'm Antoine Allen. Nice to meet you. If you have any presenting opportunities, please let me know. And that person replied and he was like, yeah, we've got a job in Germany. Do you want to apply? And I was like, okay, cool. So within 2 months, I was in Germany. So it's like, you have to reply to people because you don't know who people know. But in terms of getting to my world, there's conventional routes, which is you study journalism, you become a researcher, you become a producer, you impress the editor lets you do one report, that report's okay, you don't mess up, you don't mispronounce anyone's names, you don't break some of the many rules that people don't know exist in journalism. For example, if a child or a minor commits a crime, you can't say their name. So if you don't know anything that's going to get Ofcom involved, then you might get a second chance. My route was, I'd already been a presenter, I'd already made documentaries, I'd already done live events. I didn't even do my own report, which I think might have been illegal because I didn't know what I was doing. Anyway, so I'd done a lot before. I was then offered a chance to be a trainee at ITV London, so they trained me into how to be a TV reporter, which is a lot different to being a presenter. When I walked through the door, I was like, oh yeah, this is easy. But when you're a presenter, you literally turn up, say what you need to say to the cameraman or the editor, good luck with the edit, see you later, go home, wait a couple of weeks later to see how the video turns out. When you're a reporter, example, yesterday, I went to the offices of Bolt. There was a protest by Bolt drivers. So I'm there with the protesters. I interview the protesters. I then go back to the office, edit the interview. It's on the TV show by 6 o'clock. So you do all of that in one day for 2 minutes work that appears on TV. But it takes a whole day to do that. So until you're used to making sure that when you're there on the ground, you get the interview bits you need, you got the picture you need to work around, and you can edit it so it's before 6 o'clock. Like if you don't make your deadline, there's 2 minutes missing in the show. Like you've got to make your deadline. Whereas like I know with YouTube videos, you can upload whenever you like. No one's going to notice if you're 10 minutes late, 2 days late, 5 days late. No one really notices. With TV, like it's in the schedule for 6, so you need to get your work done. So that's a skill in itself that you eventually learn, and you get faster and faster. You realize what you need and what you don't need. But that's a whole process. So for me, in terms of advice to people, it's simply working out what you want to do, but being patient either way. Being patient for your opportunity, being patient for the right opportunities, being patient in your search for opportunities. Most of the time, people don't know what to apply for. So the BBC, ITV, Sky News, Al Jazeera, they all have trainee schemes. They all have schemes that are for people who don't have degrees. They all have work experience schemes. If you ever say, oh, can I shadow someone? Thousands of people want to shadow reporters. So most of the time, you won't be able to do that. You still have to go through the proper schemes to be able to get into the room. But the best thing now you have is YouTube and blogging, whereby you can make your own content, you can prove you can do it, you can make your own opportunities, and eventually someone will see you. So a good example of this is Pippa from Arsenal TV. She was on Arsenal TV. Now she's hosting BT shows. Do you know what I mean? So it's like, if you want to be a presenter, then you need to build your following and prove you can do it. If you want to be a reporter, which has more rules and regulations, then you need to apply for the jobs and hopefully you're given opportunity. Sometimes you have to do something that's not what you want to do in terms of, to be a TV reporter, you might have to apply to be a researcher, a runner, a producer, and then bit by bit, your chance comes eventually. You can be lucky like me and not have to do that, but for me to be lucky, there was like 8 years of me presenting local shows and around the world. So it's not luck, it's I had proven what I'd done before, and then from there I had enough transferable skills to then be shown how to use those skills in the TV reporter world. But even that, me, like, I get to the end of the question. For me, I'm a long form person. So long form is anything really over 3 minutes long. So I like documentaries. Like, that's my passion. So my goal would really to just be like Louis Theroux and just make documentaries all the time. So even I'm not really doing what I want to do every single day. I'm lucky enough to occasionally, between making reports, which I think is still important as well, to make documentaries. So I made my Lawrence Okolie documentary. I made a documentary before about a footballer. I'm going to make a documentary soon about guns. So I'm able to do that. But in the ideal world, all I do is documentaries. Be The Last Dance, Michael Jordan type documentaries. It'd be expose type documentaries. Like, I love documentaries. So it's being patient of your goals, and if your destination is like the end of the marathon, your goal, the first step is to work out your route there and understand that it might not be a straight line. Sometimes you might deviate to one side or deviate to another side, but as long as you stay focused on where you want to go, then eventually you'll get there. Most people give up before they even get a chance to see if they can do it or not, because the process is long. Like, I've been rejected a gang of times. Like, sometimes when I go on LinkedIn, I look at my messages and I see all the people who didn't reply, the people who don't reply back with any feedback, the people who don't say, oh yeah, here's an email. Like, I sent an email to BT Sport and the guy was like, oh yeah, I'll pass it on. They rejected me. I sent an email to BBC Sport before I joined ITV, and someone passed it on. They were like, oh yeah, they said that you're not quite what they're looking for. And then, like, literally a year later, my Anthony Joshua interview outperformed everyone at BBC. Like, people who've been doing boxing a lot longer than me, it got way more views. They're rights holders, so there's not much stuff we can go into, but essentially outperformed a lot of people who are known for boxing. So obviously I can do it. So it's one of those ones where you can get rejected and still be good enough, but you're not. That wasn't the role for you, basically. Or it was the role for you. You got to reapply. is what it is. Like my first interview for ITV, I didn't get it. So it's like you keep applying, you keep trying, you keep pushing forward. No one's successful straight away unless you're related to someone in the industry, or you're very lucky, or your CV is ridiculous. Like you've done everything there is to do, and they're like, man, we need to hire this person today. So yeah, you just keep grinding, you keep pushing, you use the rejection as feedback, which enables you to improve.
Brilliant, really brilliant. I want to talk a bit about one of your documentaries with Lawrence Okolie. You used to be a YouTuber. You started filming 5 years ago. This is a documentary.
Yeah.
And you know, back then, Lawrence was amateur. You was YouTuber. Did you ever think that 5 years later you'll be world champion and you'll be working for ITV News?
I think it was mad because in a documentary, I very quickly say this. We met each other on the set for Tarzan, which means that both of us were doing something that was completely irrelevant to our lives. Like, we were just out here living our best life. And Lawrence's brother, Henry, came up to me. This is why I used to think that Henry was older than Lawrence. Because his brother came up to me and said, hey, my brother's into boxing. I don't think he's focusing. Will you speak to him? Because I was a presenter, so we'd be in the lunchrooms and I'll be talking to people. And the nature of speaking is you know how to speak. So you come across as confident to people. So people... you want to use your confidence to help other people. So his brother came up to me, said that to me, and I was like, okay, cool. I'll speak to him, but I don't know that much about boxing, so I'm not sure what I can say to him. So I was like, oh, yeah, your brother started speaking to me. He said you were boxing. He was like, yeah. I was like, okay, cool. Well, here's my number. If you ever need to talk about something, about what you're going through or what's happening in your life, let me know. I do a little bit of life coaching. I do barely any life coaching, but I can talk to people about their life they really want. Give me a call. So then Lawrence, like a few weeks later, he calls me and he says, oh yeah, so I injured my right, was it right hand? I think he injured his right hand in a fight with some guy like in the ring. And I think the ABH was coming up, or there was a chance to basically beat someone who'd beaten him before. And he's like, what should I do? And I'm like, well, don't damage your hand for short-time success. But if you think you can do it, then give it a try. And during this time, Lawrence had been sparring AJ and Dillian White and I think maybe Derek Chisora, I'm not sure. But he'd been sparring some heavyweights, some professionals. And AJ's coach at the time was like, who's that professional guy? And they were like, no, Lawrence is an amateur. So they invited him to join the GB setup. But he couldn't go straight away because he'd injured his hand. And it was close to recovery, and he was like, should I do the show or not? And I was like, well, only you can make that decision, but is it worth potentially re-injuring your hand just to get this loss off your record? But I said, it's your decision. I'm not going to tell you what to do. Short story, he went and fought the guy anyway, beat him, still hurt his hand, but he made a point that guy wasn't good enough to beat him because the first loss was kind of controversial anyway. And the story made its way back to the GB setup. So they were like, okay, cool, you can still come for a trial, but this time we'll definitely give you time to heal, make sure you don't mess it up. So he then went to the GB training camp. Bit by bit, they saw his talent. They knew he was rough around the edges, but they could refine him up. They trained him up. And during that time, I was still a YouTuber, but I was a presenter as well at the same time. So I didn't know I was going to be ITV, but I knew I'd be somewhere. I thought maybe I'd be hosting a show or I'd be doing documentaries. I don't think I'd be a TV reporter. But I knew that Lawrence definitely had something special and I wanted to document his story or at least interview him so years from now he can look back at that interview and be like, oh, wow, yeah, this is where I came from. So I was like, okay, cool. Let me just interview about your life, basically. So he came to my house, literally in my bedroom. I had a little studio I set up. So in terms of advice, people don't know this, but basically I bought a studio background. I had my own camera, I had my own microphone, I had all that stuff so I could be a proper YouTuber. Like it cost me money to do that. My YouTube wasn't really making any money. Like I paid for all that myself. So I interviewed him and I didn't know that down the line he'd become who he was. But there was always that glimmer of hope. There was always the confidence that he had. So the confidence that he had gave me the confidence to know that it was worth my time to interview him. And also, he was my friend and I wanted to show his journey and hopefully along the way it could inspire some other people. He went to the Olympics. It didn't go as well as he wanted, but it was a good learning experience for him. And then at that time, he turned pro after that, joined Matchroom, and he started his journey. But if you know anything about Matchroom, they've got a lot of boxers that have turned pro of them, but haven't gone on to be a world champion. Like, it's not easy to be a world champion. It doesn't matter how good you are at the Olympics. Only a few people transition from amateur to becoming a professional and to being a world champion. So there's no guarantee he was going to do that. He had to really put in the work. But what I wanted to do was make sure that he didn't become the same situation that David Haye was in. So when David Haye became undisputed cruiserweight champion, for want of a better phrase, no one cared, simply because there wasn't enough media coverage. This is really before YouTube was anything big. Boxing-wise, unless it's a heavyweight fight, it doesn't get that much coverage. So when he became cruiserweight champion, he went to France. It wasn't like it was in a different time zone, or a significantly different time zone, but there was barely any media coverage, and he speaks about this himself. It's just a big shame. So I always thought to myself, if Lawrence or any other boxer gets to a significant level and I've got a chance to give them some mainstream coverage, I'm not going to let that slip. I'll make sure that they get an interview or a report or someone knows their story. Because I always say anyone that becomes a world champion has an inspirational story of overcoming something or dedicating their life to something else. So I tried to make sure that it was told. So in terms of Lawrence's story, he achieved everything. I just made sure that I was there. And it became a documentary as such when he went for the European title. At that point, it was a case of, okay, if he wins this fight, he's European champion, which means his next fight will be most likely for a world championship. So then it's the story of how the boy was bullied, became a world champion. So really, as someone making a documentary, you just need to make sure you're there at the pivotal moments, and in between that, you catch the ups and the downs. So I can't predict him winning, but I hope he was going to win. I can't predict 2020 will become the pandemic either. So it means that in December, when I'm in the locker room with him in the documentary, we don't know COVID exists. We're assuming that he'll probably be fighting in March for a world championship at that point. So we go to his training regime in Kent, and the documentary's like drama moment would have been when the fight was going to be arranged, who it was going to be against, the delay. That was going to be the big moment in the documentary. But obviously the pandemic happened, so the delay wasn't forced because neither fighter wanted to fight each other. It was because the lockdown happened. So that became the drama in it. And in the lead up to the fight, the hardest thing about making that documentary is I'm not a rights holder. So Sky, BBC hold the rights. Sky hold the rights to footage. So when you're not a rights holder, it's really hard to film around a fight because you don't have guaranteed access. You don't have guaranteed access to footage. If you want to use footage, it costs you a lot of money. So example, to use his 60 seconds in the Olympics was going to cost over $6,000. So like for a documentary that hasn't even had that many views, like you can't afford to pay $6,000 for like 60 seconds. It's crazy. Like it's crazy how the Olympics works. So it means you have to find more different ways to tell the story. So you tell it through pictures instead of clips, which is annoying for boxing fans because obviously you want to see the fight, but everything comes at a cost. So I was just lucky, really, that Lawrence handled his business, and my job is to tell his story in the best way. So it was my idea to make sure that when he went home to see his mum, we were there to film that moment. It was my idea to make sure when he's walking around Hackney and people are congratulating him, that we're there to see his impact on the local community. It was my idea that when he's got his poster up for his book, we film him at the poster to show, like, look, the Hackney boy is now on billboards. He's now the best in the world. So you tell that inspirational story that hopefully inspires others and enables them to think, yeah, I too can believe and I too can achieve my dreams. And the hardest thing is just getting that access. Like when you're not in the media, you're like, oh, how comes this documentary hasn't been made? Or how comes this person hasn't been interviewed? A lot of the time, the agents or the boxers or the sports people or the politicians or whoever, they say no to the interview, and you can't force anyone to do an interview. Like I can say no to the interview. Like, do you know what I mean? Like the nature of any interview, the person has to say yes, and then from there, you try your best to make sure you're not wasting their time or you're not doing something that's boring. So hopefully, people that watch the documentary, even if you're not a boxing fan, you find it interesting, find out where he's come from, how it's changed his life, how it's impacted his family, his journey, the ups and the downs, and what he wants to do afterwards. Like you find that whole journey, and I think that's the goal: is finding the interesting story, getting the person who's the pivotal moment or the pivotal character in that story to agree to be filmed, and then after that, editing it and making it in a way that makes it watchable.
Brilliant. Antoine, I wanted to ask you, obviously, you did something that, as a diehard football fan, is kind of like a dream for me to do. Obviously, you presented at the Champions League final, not once, but twice, in Milan, in Cardiff. What I want to know is, would you ever have like an ambition or a dream or a goal to maybe present at a boxing event somewhere like Madison Square Garden, somewhere like Wembley? Maybe, you know, the guy that interviews the fighter after the fight, or the guy that presents the actual show itself?
I think live events are always the most thrilling. Like, your heart's racing, the crowd's cheering. So my biggest sports event, sometimes I forget I've just done stuff, was the Cricket World Cup. So when England won the Cricket World Cup, I was the presenter at Trafalgar Square. So there's a stage, I'm hosting all of it. Obviously, it went to like the Super Six, so it meant that there's a packed Trafalgar Square, so many people that we told people they can't come in anymore. It's gone to super overs, which most people didn't even know what they were. England had never won the World Cup before. They win the World Cup. People jump into the fountains, which are like historical things that you're not allowed to jump into. Also, the water's not clean. It's like hella toxic water. So it was like all kinds of madness popped off. But that moment will live forever. And it was just crazy. And to be a part of history, to tell history, to have that energy of the crowd, like there's no feeling like that. Most of the time when you do a report, there's a camera and there's you. Like, you never get the feedback until people tweet you or they DM you and they say, oh, that was really good. So when you're at a live event, like I've been ringside when Daniel Diamante's doing his ring announcing, or after the fight you're interviewing the boxer, when they're full of adrenaline and their heart's racing. Like, that's really super exciting. And to be at those places that you always dreamed of going to, like Madison Square Garden, Las Vegas, Wembley with 80,000 people, like, you can't buy those experiences. So I'd love the experience of doing it, but I wouldn't want to be a ring announcer. Post-fight, there'll be interesting things to do. Like, I'd like to ask those questions. But for me, my skill, or what I enjoy the most, is sit-down interviews. So I'd rather than be ringside interviewing the person after the fight. I'd rather be the person who does the sit-down interview afterwards or before the fight. So Anthony Yarde, 30-minute interview about the death of his grandmother and his dad through COVID. Anthony Yarde, again, interview about him him thinking about changing coaches, deciding not to change coach, but bringing in a new coach into his team. AJ, what he's going to do to win back his belts. Like, when I've got time with you, I hate short things. So obviously, pre-fight interviews, that's like a minute and a half. They're very short, and you don't get to ask every single question you want to ask me. If I was to choose anything in life, it'd be to be like essentially the sports/culture version of Oprah, where you come to me with something that's bigger than sport, where I get to really talk to you, and someone that watches it will be like, "Oh wow, I didn't know that about them." Oh wow, yeah, I've been inspired by that interview. Oh wow, I know their journey better now. So I was already a fan, but now I'm a super fan. Or I didn't like that person before, but actually now I like him. Or I didn't like him before, and now I really don't like him because I know even more about him. But whatever it is, I want them to get more information from that interview, and then they can make their own decision. But the energy of being ringside and being in those places is amazing. So I was lucky enough to go to Saudi Arabia to see AJ win back his belts. And he was walking from the weigh-in to his hotel room, and I quickly grabbed him. I was like, what's your message to everyone back at home in London? And it was a very quick interview. The sound was hella terrible because I was using my own equipment, and I'm trying to get me in the shot as well. So I've been there. It's fun. It's a great experience. But at the same point, I still prefer, in terms of working, to do the sit-down interview afterwards, where you talk about what was it like. So with Lawrence, I interviewed him afterwards, like 2 days later, ringside. He's fully calmed down. The moment's kind of sunk in, but then you can really ask him, how does it feel? How did it feel for your family? How does it feel now being a world champion? Does it feel how you thought it would? What's next? Do you know what I mean? Like, in the moment when your head's kind of shook because you've been punched in the face, your adrenaline's pumping, you probably don't even give the best answers. So for me, I would still prefer to do my sit downs, but I'd always want to be ringside myself, probably as a fan, just so I know I saw it with my own eyes rather than I watched on TV.
Brilliant. I like how you touched upon obviously having the sit down interviews, and one interview obviously you mentioned this a minute ago is Anthony Yarde one. And the Anthony Yarde one I like is the fact that you ask them questions which people always want to know in terms of trainer, maybe moving from trainers from Tunde to someone new, and obviously recently as well the Stanley Edwards interview. Do those two interviews give you the satisfaction that you got to talk and ask questions that you probably some fans probably want to hear you ask?
Yeah, I always like that. So, like I said, as a YouTuber, previous YouTuber, I go to the comments. Like you shouldn't do it, but I still go to the comments. I still read what people say. I still see the mean ass comments. I still see the funny comments. I still see the nice comments. And the nature of people, we always put a highlight on the negative. When you might have 1,000 comments and there'll be 2 negative ones, and people will tweet the 2 negatives. They won't even mention the 999 the ones that are amazing. Do you know what I mean? So it's one of those ones where I use those negative ones to refine my skills, but also I use the positive ones to see what people like. So for me, if I do an interview and people are like, I enjoyed watching that from start to finish, or I always wanted to know that question, or I'm glad that he was able to open up, or I've never seen that person open up before. Like when I do an interview with someone, the one phrase I'm looking for from them as an interviewee is, yeah, that's a good question. If you get someone to say, yeah, that's a good question, then you know you've asked them something they've maybe never been asked before, or they need to spend some time to think about, which is always good as well. Because if you ask them stuff they can just reel off the top of their head, then you got to work a little bit harder on your questions. With Sonny, like I've interviewed Charlie already, so I knew half of the story, but Sonny's a man by himself, so it's interesting to know him as a person. Now, Sonny's very big on social media, so it's interesting to know the person who tweets versus the person in real life, and he's pretty much the same person. But at the same point, he's motivated by his 2 sons. He's motivated because his brother's proven it can be done, so he needs to do it himself. He's motivated to live up to the prophecy his father gave that both of his sons will be world champions one day. So all of that pressure, all of that energy was on his back when he went into the ring on Friday, and he was able to pull it off. So for me, like, it's always satisfying to know that you hope someone was going to achieve their goals, but you enabled them to speak about the motivations behind them, that enabled them to give them a chance to talk directly to their fans, to say, look, this is me. These are my hopes, my dreams. You kind of bare your soul to the audience, and hopefully people respond to it. And I think with Anthony Yarde specifically, people responded to it. They hadn't seen that side of Anthony before, him talking about mental health. And with Anthony, it was a journey. So when I interviewed him first, it was for ITV News. And his grandmother died and his dad had died. And he was very inspirational. He was very positive. But in himself, in the second interview, he admitted that he hadn't given himself the chance to really mourn properly and to admit that had been a toll on him mentally, because he'd had a terrible 2020. Like, most people don't see 2 of their close relatives die. Even if you're not like super in speaking terms of them, like, death is death, and it can impact you, especially if you need to get into the ring, you need to train, you're the breadwinner in your family. There's loads of pressures that are around him at the time. He went into that Linden fight, obviously didn't perform as well as he wanted. So mental health is a big thing in terms of someone's ability to be successful. We've seen it in all walks of life. People who go on Love Island, people who become boxers. Tyson Fury is an example of this. People who have seem successful in the media, but really they're battling their own demons. So to get someone to speak about that is not easy. And also to handle that conversation with care is also not easy. So example, Ryan Garcia, obviously he stepped away from boxing because of mental health. A lot of boxers or boxing channels, they're not used to talking about mental health. So some people have handled it with care. Some people really haven't, and they question his motives. You don't know what's going on inside someone's head. You don't know that despite them having millions of followers or millions of pounds in the bank, that they've still got demons that they're fighting against. Like, it doesn't matter how much money you've got. If you're depressed or you've got depression, you've still got depression. Now, there's lots of things you can use that money for to help yourself, but being willing to seek help is the hardest thing in the world. If you ask anybody who's got a relative who is an alcoholic, I could tell you they're alcoholic. The family member can say they're alcoholic, but until that alcoholic is willing to admit they have a problem, they're never going to be able to get help. So it's good that Ryan was able to say, look, I need help. I need to step away from the boxing for a little bit and just sort me out. Because boxing, like athletics, is millimeters. Unless you're 100% focused, you either go from the guy that's knocking people out to being the guy that gets knocked out. Mike Tyson, when he was 100% focused, was knocking people out. When he was not focused, he was getting his ass knocked clean out. So it's like, there's a good documentary called Champs, which basically tells the story of Mike Tyson, Bernard Hopkins, and my mind's gone blank. Who fought Lennox Lewis? Still fighting now. Gonna have a rematch with Mike Tyson.
Van
Holyfield. So basically, it tells the story of all three of them. And in that documentary, one of the reporters, he said, Mike Tyson, no one wants to admit this, in terms of height and physique, is an average boxer. But when he's focused and he's 100% on his game, he's an amazing boxer. But if he's not focused, he's easily beatable because he's not the biggest person in the world. If he's not in shape, his punches aren't as ferocious. And this is an example why a gang of people were beating him by the end of it because he didn't care about boxing anymore. So for you to be focused, you need your mental health to be on 100%. As soon as you lack focus, you become Tyson Fury, where you put on a gang of weight because you've got demons outside of the ring. When you're not focused, you go down the Mike Tyson route. So it's good that Ryan Garcia was able to take this time out of boxing. And it was good that Anthony was able to open up to me, but also open up to himself, more importantly, about what he needs to do about himself. But also, you're a role model, regardless whether you like it or not. I know some boxers say they're not role models, but they are. As soon as you gain followers, people look to you not just to knock people out, but also to teach them about the world. So if you can say, look, this happened to me, I'm going through some stuff, it's going to enable Paul, Jane, Tim, or John, who's sitting at home, who's also going through some stuff, to think, oh, well, if this boxer who look big and tough on TV is able to seek help, maybe I should seek help too. So I think that's the important conversation we have to have, regardless of what you do in life, is how you can inspire someone to help themselves. So Anthony was able to do that, really. He's able to say, look, I went through some stuff and it's not easy and I'm still going through some stuff, which I think helped his fans learn a little bit more about him and hopefully has helped them learn more about themselves. And hopefully if they needed to, they would have sought some help as well.
Antoine, I don't know if you're allowed to talk about on camera, but has there ever been, what's been the most awkward moment for you in an interview where obviously you've had experience of presenting and live TV, live recordings. Obviously, I doubt you've ever froze or gone quiet, but has there been a moment where in your mind you're like, oh, damn, and you just pulled it out of the bag, but till this day you think about it and that's the most awkward situation in an interview?
I can say it because people can go on my YouTube and see this. I interviewed Daniel Dubois and Frank Bruno at the same time. Now, obviously, I'm like 33. I grew up watching Frank Bruno, so he is a legend. He is a legend. Daniel's up and coming. So my idea was I interview the former champ with the future champ. It's going to be hella sick. Everybody's going to be like, oh, yeah, Daniel's up and coming. He's being mentored by Frank. Frank's going to be inspirational. I was like, yeah, it's going to make them both look good. I was like, yeah, it'd be really cool. And I always look for challenging interviews. So I get there now, and I'm wearing these Barker shoes, which are like a really nice shoe brand. I've got my suit on, and I'm like a size 10, which isn't that big, but in the shoes, they look a little bit big. But no one ever said this to me. So I walk into the ring. Frank and Daniel a little bit late, which is okay. We're setting up. And Frank comes into the ring, and Frank's like, hey, how you doing? I'm like, hey, I'm good, thanks. Nice to meet you, Frank. Thanks for your time. Daniel comes in and like, hey, Daniel, how you doing? Nice to meet you. Frank looks down. He's like, oh, your shoes are kind of big. I'm like, yeah, it's a random thing. Like, I didn't expect him to say that to me. So I was like, oh, yeah, they're kind of big, but this normal size. And then we're setting up the cameras still. So then he starts calling me Bigfoot. Like, throughout the whole interview, he calls me Bigfoot. So whenever I'm talking to Daniel, he's like, oh, Bigfoot, thanks for that question, or Bigfoot, da-da-da-da-da. So I'm having to ignore him calling me Bigfoot and just do the interview. It just ruins the whole interview. I'm like, one of the legends of the sport is calling me Bigfoot, which is making the interview hella awkward and hella annoying from my perspective. But then it was a challenge for me to keep it going. So Frank himself, he's a good talker. Anyone that knows Daniel Dubois, he's not super confident on camera. So there's a difference between having someone who's very confident on camera to someone who's not so confident on camera. So I'm still trying to tease good answers out of Daniel, because the reports about Daniel, like, Frank's had his time in the spotlight. He's just there to show that Daniel's being mentored by someone. But every time I'm trying to get a good answer from Daniel, Frank's interjecting, saying Bigfoot, or saying, oh, you can't ask him that, he's already answered that, blah, blah, blah. So it was super ridiculously awkward. And then, because it was an event that's been organised by the gym that's near Grenfell, where George Groves used to train out of, there was some YouTubers there as well. So they're watching this interview take place. They're laughing in the background because Frank's trying to call me Bigfoot the whole time. It's hella awkward. So I made the best out of it that I could. It's still a good interview, still interesting. It's more interesting about Frank than it is about Daniel, to tell the truth, because he starts talking about knife crime and how boxing changed his life, how it can change other people's lives, which are really good answers. It's just the Bigfoot part of it just was super annoying. But then that's part of the challenge. Like I always say, there's no bad interviewees, there's only bad interviewers. So you need to make sure in any given situation, you ask the questions that get the good answers. So even though he was calling me Bigfoot all the way through and it was hella annoying for me, I still made sure we got good answers. It was enough for the report, and the report was like 3 minutes long. The full interviews on my YouTube channel, which is like, I think like 15 minutes or something. And it's still watchable. Like, it hasn't got hella views, but if someone cares about Daniel Dubois, they can watch all of that and it's still an interesting watch. But it's one of those ones where it was just super challenging because Frank was just not on it that day, or he decided to just play silly beggars, as my nan would say. And it was just one of those ones where a lot of the time with sports interviews, they're there to be interviewed. So it's not that hard. They want to answer questions. Your job is to make the answers interesting. So ask them interesting questions and they give you interesting responses. But for the most part, people are willing to talk. Now, you do come across people like Daniel Dubois or Joe Joyce who aren't normally great speakers. But I always say this like this. When people take the piss, I always say, most people never find their talent in life. If you're a boxer and you're a professional, you've found your talent in life. For you then to have a second talent, which is being an amazing talker, is near impossible. So there's only really Conor McGregor, Muhammad Ali, Anthony Joshua's a really good talker, Lawrence is a really good talker, Tyson Fury is a really good talker, but I'm talking like you could watch them give a speech by themselves for like 30 minutes. It'd be inspirational, it'd be funny. There's hardly anyone that can say they're good at two things. Most people are lucky enough to be good at one. So Daniel, he's not very good at interviews, but he's a good boxer. Obviously, recent events have proved that he might not be world level, at least right now. Joe Joyce is on the way to being world level, but neither of them are great at interviews. But such is life. I'm not great in the ring. So, like, if we were to switch jobs, I get knocked clean out, and he might not be great at doing reports. Like, it is what it is. So, yeah, in that situation, it was a test for me that I didn't see coming. I went there thinking it was going to be amazing. Yeah, people are going to love this. It's going to be another big hit. It's going to be another big views, blah, blah, blah. And it just didn't end up like that. And also, I thought Daniel was going to be a world champion. So I was like, oh, yeah, the rise of the champion type thing, similar to Lawrence. And it just shows, like, you can pick people who are prospects, but not everybody makes it in the ring. Not everybody lives up to the hype or lives up to the stage they can get to. And also there's challenging stuff. So with Frank, it was a challenge, but there's still good answers there. If I could go back in time and get him to not call me Bigfoot, yeah, I wish I could. Did people notice in the comment section that he did that? Yeah, they did. So it is what it is. Like, you don't take yourself too seriously. And after that, you're like, well, it's happened now. Should I post the full video or should I hide away from it? I was like, no, let me post the whole video. People can see for themselves. They can make their own decisions. They can enjoy it. They can laugh. It's one video out of hundreds of reports I've done. So it doesn't live on my conscience. It's just something like, in terms of the question you just asked me, no one's asked me that question. So I was like, oh yeah, I remember that time. But I do occasionally think about that video. So it's good to think about the challenging moments. The most challenging interview I ever had actually was with 3 footballers and a pop star about mental health, and getting 4 people to talk about depression is not easy. And to try and give them all time to talk about what they're going through and to make it flow is super ridiculously challenging. So that was a test, and they were all willing to talk about that, but to get them to really open up, you got 5 men in total talking about mental health is not easy. So that was a challenge. But in terms of something that was awkward, it was just that moment with Frank.
So Jermaine, if we ever get the opportunity, it's not about the questions, it's about our footwear, so we've got to be ready.
Yeah, man, just wear some like tiny trainers if you ever interview.
I'm not gonna lie, I got big feet as well, so I'm a bit worried now.
Antoine, I wanted to ask you, obviously, I don't know if you are allowed to give a prediction, but biggest fight in heavyweight boxing history is about to happen. Who's your money on AJ versus Fury, and why?
The reason I won't give a prediction, like I don't want it to be a cop-out, simply because hopefully I'll interview them both. So if I have to say such and such is going to win, it's just super awkward when you're interviewing the other person.
Yeah.
So in terms of being professional, I can't really do that. But what I can do is talk about the comments that people say. So I'll start with AJ. People were like, oh, AJ's a big... there's not even comments, actually. Some things that Tyson says as well. Oh, he's big and bulky. Oh, he got beat by Andy Ruiz Jr. Like, these are the main reasons people give as to why he's going to get schooled by Tyson. But people forget they don't give away gold medals. They really don't give away gold medals. AJ's improved a lot. And people also need to remember, I interviewed AJ before he fought Andy Ruiz Jr. He physically was built for Jarrell Miller, who's a lot bigger than Andy. So he was expecting to be in the ring and to trade. Anybody that goes on to my Twitter account, go to my picture, is me next to AJ. Like, when I interviewed AJ, I'd just come back from Germany. When I was in Germany, I was eating 3 meals a day. I was going to the gym. I weighed like 96 or 97 kilograms. So and I'm 6'2". I was a big version of me. AJ's like 6'6", 6'5". He looked huge compared to me, and I'm already a big human. He looked massive. So I was like, damn, this brother's massive. So for him to lose the muscle to fight Andy, there just wasn't enough time. So when he got into the ring with Andy, he was carrying way too much muscle. There's some other stuff that happened, which I can't go into. So it's like, there's lots of reasons why he lost to Andy. The second interview I had with AJ for ITV, which is my 3rd interview in total, but my second interview, this is in September now, when they announced the fight, he'd lost hella weight. And we're next to each other again. It's like I'm next to a completely different person. So he'd trimmed down. So in terms of learning from previous mistakes, 1, Anthony Joshua does that. In terms of having a good team around him, 2, he's got a good team around him. In terms of being willing to bring in new people, he brought in new people. In terms of having a loss now and knowing what it's like to lose and knowing the reaction you get from people, knowing that you get people who will lose faith in you, who will call you all kinds of names, who will call you a fraud, all of that sorry, I'm just plugging in my laptop before it dies. All of that will motivate you now to make sure, to the best of your ability, you do not lose again. So that means when the fight's eventually announced, in the ring, you have the best version of Anthony Joshua. Now, in terms of Tyson Fury is obviously someone that's grown up in the fighting world. He's a pure fighter by heart. I always say there's 2 types of boxers. There's someone who joined boxing to change their life. Lawrence Okolie joined it to lose weight. Anthony Joshua joined it to get off the streets. Mike Tyson joined it to get off the streets. Or there's someone who comes from a boxing family, or their dad is into boxing. So Sonny and Charlie Edwards, dad's into boxing. They had a boxing ring in their front garden. Tyson Fury comes from a boxing family. Floyd Mayweather comes from a boxing family. Now, someone who comes from a boxing family will always have an advantage over someone who joins boxing late in the game. Now, that doesn't mean you can't catch up. It just means in terms of living and breathing the sport, learning all the skills, you'll always be better than that person because you've been doing it for longer. Like, if someone becomes a singer and they were singing in their church choir since they were 2 years old, they're always going to be better than someone who started singing when they're 22. Like, it's just how it is. But that doesn't mean that the 22-year-old can't be a greater singer. It just means they need to use other skills to get to that level. So Tyson Fury will always have that pedigree of being someone who's lived and breathed boxing, but he had that moment of being out of the ring. He had that moment of falling out of the sport. He's now obviously very much back in love with it, but that moment, you can't get them years back. During those moments, AJ was fighting all the way through. Has Tyson been in the ring whereby he's had to dig super deep to get the victory? Obviously, he rose from the ground against Deontay Wilder. He put on a great performance against Klitschko. But has he fought someone of AJ's physicality and boxing ability? I don't think he has as of yet. Klitschko is obviously a very good boxer, and he's going to be a legend of the sport. But at the same point, I think AJ is another level to Klitschko, and he'll show that in the ring. But again, Tyson's back in love with the sport, which is great for everybody who loves heavyweight boxing. So when they do eventually fight, which I think is going to be in Saudi Arabia, you'll have the best versions of them both. And I hope that people get behind both British fighters. Like, we have to remember they're both British, and they cheer the best man on the day. They don't let external things or ridiculous statements about seeing this person is, you know, when AJ made a speech about Black Lives Matter, sometimes you see in the comment section, people are like, oh, AJ doesn't like white people. Look at AJ's like management team. Look at Eddie Hearn. Like, it makes no sense to make that statement. Like, people don't understand things, so they make pointless comments. I think this fight will divide the nation, but hopefully not via race. It'll just be preference. Like, I'm a Tyson Fury fan. I'm an Anthony Joshua fan. So it's one of those ones where, in terms of prediction, my prediction is it's going to be a great fight. And I wish it was 3 fights, especially if one person wins and the other person wins. Hopefully there'll be a third. If one person dominates both fights, I doubt there'll be a third. But I think 3 fights for the legacy of boxing. This one is definitely going to be abroad, most likely. So Saudi Arabia. A fight of that magnitude needs its day in Las Vegas, Madison Square Gardens, one of the two. Do you know what I mean? Those are the iconic boxing venues. But it's 2 British fighters, so it needs to be at Wembley. 80,000 people. Like, Jesus, that would be amazing. I already know, like, hopefully I interview them both. I already know the question I'm going to ask them. And hopefully the fans will resonate with that question. But 80,000 at Wembley would be epic. Like, if you're right at the top of the seats and you need binoculars, you'll be telling people you were there. Like, I remember when Mike Tyson fought Lennox Lewis. People will say where they were, who they watched it with. That's that level of fight. When it's a fight that your nan's talking about, that's beyond the sport. Like, examples of transcending the sport right now, Lewis Hamilton. Most people, like, I basically have to think called a nan test. If your nan knows someone, they're famous. Like KSI, millions of people know him. My nan don't know who KSI is. So he's famous in YouTube world and in young people world, but not like mainstream world. My nan knows who Anthony Joshua is. Does she know who Tyson Fury is? I don't know. But Anthony Joshua is like well known. My nan knows who Usain Bolt is. I'm Jamaican, so she should know. But at the same point, like, other people's nans who aren't Jamaican know who Usain Bolt is. People know who Tiger Woods is. People know who Serena Williams is. People outside the sport know who Conor McGregor is. Like, that's Muhammad Ali. Like, that's when you transcend the sport. Anthony Joshua was definitely transcended the sport. Tyson Fury, due to his mental health struggles, has now also started to transcend the sport. But at the same point, he's not quite there yet, I think. I still think there's a little bit more that he needs to do to be like everybody knows who he is. But at the same point, it's going to be a huge fight. Like you said, it's going to be probably the biggest fight in history, especially if the first fight's amazing, the second fight's going to be huge. So I think it's going to be a good spectacle for everyone. Hopefully people will get behind it and they'll support. They won't make it about race. They'll just enjoy 2 of the best fighters proving who is the best. And it's a rare occurrence. I know boxing fans love to talk about box office. They love to talk about ticket sales, love to talk about who's getting 60%, who's getting 50%, blah, blah, blah. Like, your average fan doesn't care about that. Like, general sports fan, we just want the fight to be arranged and 12 rounds of great boxing to take place, and everybody afterwards can give their opinions on who's the better fighter if it goes to decision. Like, that's what boxing's good about. Like, the documentary I talked about, Champs, it talks about how Mike Tyson was in his prime. I'm not talking about in the ring, I'm talking about his aura. And you judge the aura of a person by who's ringside. So back in the day, Mike Tyson fights, you've got Denzel, you've got Kirk Douglas, you've got Hollywood A-list actors ringside. That's when something's huge. So when I was in Saudi Arabia, I was like, who's here? Let me look around. Israel Adesanya was there. I think Usher was performing, so he was somewhere. But it wasn't that level yet. But when it's Las Vegas, everyone's going to be there. If it's Saudi Arabia, will people fly all the way there? For America, it's a long-ass flight, so I'm not sure if they will. But it'll be that level of fight where people will say, I was there, or I watched it on this channel. I watched it with my friends. I watched it in the pub. Do you know what I mean? It's one of those ones. So it's going to be epic. Hopefully, I'll be there. If I'm not, I'll be watching it like everyone else on TV. But prediction-wise, I think it'll just be a great fight.
No, 100%. I echo that. Hopefully, especially the second fight, the British fans deserve it to be in the UK. Whether it's Wembley, whether it's in Manchester, whether it's at Tottenham's new stadium, whatever, we deserve it to be here, because as British fans, we need to see the two best in the division, both British, get it on in our country. No disrespect to Saudi, no disrespect to America, but they need to be here, and we deserve to go.
And it puts boxing on the map here. Like, there's no excuse. Every mainstream media is going to cover it regardless, but there's no excuse of not having really good coverage when it's right in our backyard. And hopefully we can get good access. Hopefully DAZN and Sky and ESPN aren't stringent with stuff. They're like, look, let's just sell this fight so every fan knows it's happening and then can also support it's happening, whether it's pay-per-view, whether it's going to their local pub, whether it's going to the event itself. Like, it's going to be sold out. Like, it'll sell out like 2 times over. But at the same point, like, it'll be epic. Like, it'll just be epic.
Yeah, it's a fight I can't wait. A fight that we've been talked about for years, and it's now finally nearly going to happen now. And I just can't wait. Like, I just hope they get it over the line and we get this fight out there for the fans. I think it's going to not only just make British boxing big, but it's going to make non-boxer fans watch the fight 100%. Yeah.
It's simple as that. Like, if you think back in the day, household names, Eubanks, like Nigel Benn, Lennox Lewis, like, people knew them. Now people know Anthony Joshua, people kind of know Tyson Fury. They're not household names like to non-boxing fans, because boxing went very much pay-per-view. It wasn't on like ITV as much as it used to be. It wasn't in the press as much as it used to be. So this fight will really put it back on the map. And I know boxing fans don't like to admit it. UFC's been on boxing's tail like for a hot minute. Like, people get excited for UFC simply because the fights they want to see get arranged. Like, there's barely any delays. Whereas boxing, everything gets delayed. Pacquiao Mayweather got delayed. Like, you're just like, geez, you don't know if things are going to happen. And then there's lots of long stuff around that. I think next week or the week after, it should be announced. And then after that, it's just a build-up. And what I liked about Pacquiao Mayweather, Mayweather was asked the question, how comes you're not trash-talking him? And he said, this fight sells itself. And I think even though Tyson's Tyson, he's going to be talking all kinds of smack, this fight sells itself. Like, you don't need to say wild stuff. Like, boxing fans, non-boxing fans, it's going to be everywhere. It's going to be on every channel. It's going to be mainstream. It's going to be Good Morning Britain. It's going to be BBC Breakfast. It's going to be any talk show is going to be talking about this fight. So you don't need Tyson saying madness about AJ. You don't need AJ saying madness about Tyson. Everyone's going to watch anyway. Like, boxing fans know there's going to be some animosity there, but at the same point, like, it's going to sell itself quite easily. So I think, personally, if I get the interviews, I'm not going to be trying to provoke them to say something crazy about each other. I know what I'm going to ask, and it's going to be a chance for them to really just talk about how boxing has changed their life and how winning this will change themselves internally, because they're both rich, they're good. So it's more than money, even though obviously money's been floated around. They can do any fight. AJ could shadow box someone and sell out Wembley. Like, he ain't struggling to sell out Wembley. So this is about legacy. This is really your name in the history books. This is conversations whereby people are saying, well, if Muhammad Ali was around, would he be able to beat the undisputed person? Do you know what I mean? Like, when you're in that kind of conversation. Right now, Tyson might talk himself into that conversation, but he's not in that conversation. But if he wins, then you're like, whoa, okay, GOAT conversations. So they're like some serious stuff now. Your legacy gets built on this fight, I think. And I don't think right now, when it comes to time, people will talk about it. But right now, people don't know. They're not talking about it's going to be the greatest. But whoever wins this will be up there. And it's going to be serious conversations about, well, could they beat Mike Tyson? Could they beat a prime Lennox, who I think doesn't get enough praise? Could they beat Muhammad Ali? Like, do you know what I mean? So it's going to be more interesting, I think, now.
Yeah, I agree, because I think this is a legacy fight. Like you agreed, this is a fight. We haven't had an undisputed champion since Lennox Lewis. We had never had two British fighters, heavyweight fighters, going for all belts at the same time. So, like I said, it's an iconic fight, the legacy fight, and it's a chance for both fighters to be great.
Yep. Really is. It really is. It's writing your name in a history book. Simple as that, really. When I spoke about Lawrence, I was like, what do you want to do next? He was like, legacy. I want to be undisputed. I want to be a 3-weight champion. Obviously, the Bridgeweight's coming in, so he'd probably be the first time anyone be able to do that. But then he wants to go up to heavyweight. Only people to do it, Evander Holyfield and David Haye. So, like, boxers, once you've been a world champion, you get the belt, you go home, and then you go back to the gym. Because you realise winning it's easy-ish, maintaining it's the hard part, and then building on it's the hardest part. So there's plenty of boxers who become world champion and lost their next fight. So it's like, for you to build a legacy that 10 years, 20 years, 50 years from now, people are still talking about you, then you got to do something really special. Like Mike Tyson, no one remembers his losses. People are still talking about him being great despite all of his losses. Like, you got to do something special. Michael Jordan, like, people still, when talk about basketball, he's the greatest of all time. Tiger Woods has been terrible for a little minute, and people still talk about Tiger Woods. Like, there's people who live beyond their sport. And weirdly, these are sports that don't have a measuring stick. So, example with athletics, Usain Bolt's the fastest man of all time. That's undisputed until someone breaks that record. Whereas when Lennox Lewis retired, someone else takes the belts. So everything you're arguing about in terms of who's the greatest when Muhammad Ali retired is about objective. Like, it's subjective. There's no objective analysis of this person is definitely the best. Everything's opinion based. So in boxing, an opinion based sport, whether it's the judges, whether it's the fans, for you to then be like, actually, I'm undisputed, I'm the best. That's a real statement, and only history can really define that. And this fight will be that version of history. The pen's in both fighters' hands, and only one of them is going to get to write their name in the GOAT conversation. The other person is going to be the guy that lost to Anthony Joshua, or the guy that lost to Tyson Fury, which neither of them want to be. Like, second place, nobody remembers. That was a Nelly lyric. I didn't make that up.
No, 100%. Hopefully, the first thing is just let's get this fight over the line, and then as fans, we get to see it 100%. Antoine, I want to say thank you for joining us today. It's been a pleasure talking to you. We always talk about your work, your interviews, your Lawrence Okolie documentary, and I hope we get to see a lot more in the future, and a lot more fighters as well. We enjoyed the Anthony Joshua one. I can't wait to see the Tyson Fury one as well.
Thanks a lot. I really appreciate having the opportunity to talk to you guys. I know you've been growing your platform. You're doing a great job. So hopefully your fans are appreciating the work you put in. And I always say, obviously, I've been a YouTuber, I've been a blogger. You're working for free. Essentially, it's the views and the support and the comments that really motivate you to push forward. And it's like, oh yeah, that video did well. Let me try and do that again, or let me push forward and let me really do something that you think the people are gonna look for. I'm lucky enough to be on the salary, so I try and make some content. But if people don't watch it, I'm like, I'm still good. I'm getting paid. So it's one of those things where I try to use my platform to give sports people, motivational people, inspirational people, someone with a story to tell, the opportunity to be in the mainstream, to tell their story, to gain a new audience if they're a sports person, or if they've got an issue they need to talk about that can help others, to help them do that. And I'm able to do that, and I'm thankful that people like yourself are watching and supporting and sharing and liking and giving your opinion as well. But the grind is really done by yourselves. Like, you're really pushing content and you're really helping people stay up to date. Like, I dipped my toe in the boxing world, but I wrote a post about this recently. I do other stuff. Like, I'll be doing football one day, I'll be doing guns another day, I'll be doing knife crime. Like, I don't just do boxing. So it means that it needs people who are dedicating themselves to the sport to give people the information. Like, before the interview, I was thinking about this. If I interview you, you're either a champion or you're going to be a champion. It's very rare I interview the person who just won the ABAs, or I interview you if you're just about to go to the Olympics. That's because there's a chance that you'll be Olympic gold medalist, or you just go into the Olympics. That's a big deal. But that in-between section, you don't get onto ITV News. You don't get onto mainstream media until you're a champion. But you need platforms like yourself, you need the bloggers, you need the Twitter people, you need the Instagrammers to promote people, to give them a chance to talk, to tell people about their story, even if you don't get to interview them, because then they build a fan base. Otherwise, there's no difference between boxers and two people fighting in the street. Like, it's the fans and the organization that make it a sport. Without fans, it's just two people fighting. And I always think it's weird how you can be a world champion at welterweight, or you can be a world champion at heavyweight. People care about the heavyweights. Why? Because it's the marquee sport. Just like you can be a 100-meter world record holder, everybody loves you. You can be the world record holder for the 3,000-meter walk, and no one cares. But you're both putting in the work. You're both working super hard, and it's really the amount of people that are willing to talk about you and give you a platform that pushes you up. So you need yourselves and other YouTubers to be giving the people those platforms and talking about the heavyweight fight, but also talking about the Sonny Edwins of these worlds, and talking about the up-and-coming people. And I'm not able to do that all the time. That's why I salute and respect the work that you guys are doing.
Thank you. It means a lot.
Appreciate that. Really appreciate that. Antoine, thank you so much for joining us, and we can't wait to see more of your work.
Thanks a lot. Keep up the good work, guys.
Thank you. Take care. Stay safe. Bye-bye.